We begin with this story, the story of Serge Aurier, a strange story indeed. Aurier posting on his Instagram late Tuesday night a picture of himself getting a haircut via his hairdresser. This would go against government rules on social distancing, supposed to be only people within your immediate household, and of course less than 24 hours before the club is set to return to training. Spurs have opened an investigation. This not the first time, though, that Aurier has been in trouble over social distancing. Craig, Shaka, Jules, let's dive in on this story, as odd as it may be. Jules, we'll start with you. I've seen the reaction to Serge Aurier on social media. It has been overwhelmingly negative. I wonder, what's the reaction been in the English football community?
Well, I think if we start with his club, his teammates, I think there probably would be a few of them who once again would feel disappointed by his attitude, by his behavior. This is not the first time, it's the third time in the last 2 months that he has broken the rules of lockdown. Twice before he was running without respecting social distancing. This is even different because he brought his hairdresser, his barber, to his house to get a haircut. He doesn't think to seem that is that big deal, Serge. Is that he believes that he's been blown out of proportion completely and that he just wanted a haircut, that he is negative, the barber is negative. I don't know if the barber was really tested, but anyway, and that it was very quick, and then the guy went home. There's a lot of issues with this. Obviously, one is breaking the rules, but two, when did that happen? Because if that happened after Aurier was tested on Sunday or Monday, and between those tests and when he went back to training yesterday, for example, then it's even more serious, if you want, because in between his test and going back to training to see all the people at the club and etc., even with respecting social distancing, he might have had the virus or something like that through the barber. So there's a lot of issues there, and a lot of people at the club are not happy.
Craig, what do you make of this story? Obviously, as Jules mentioned, it's not the first time that Aurier has had trouble with this issue.
No, and I think generally dressing rooms will tend to, for the most, probably get on with it. I mean, I'm sure there are a few people not best pleased. However, the stupidity of it, as Jill said, not being the first time, is enough to make a few people very angry. Look, I've never really been in the camp of the footballers have to be role models in general. But I think when we're talking about, people dying here, and there have been people dying by the thousands, particularly in the UK, then I think anybody in the public eye has to be seen to be setting an example, because we've already seen some of the idiotic behaviour from members of the public in terms of not regarding the social distancing. And I think it is incumbent on high-profile people, and particularly players and sports that fans look up to make sure you're adhering to the government guidelines. Because if some of the big names are not doing it, then you can see why some of the public are quite happy to follow suit. And that spells danger for trying to get the pandemic, get the curve flattened and get it going down. And it's just idiotic behaviour that, can encourage other people, particularly young people, to go out and just get on with their normal daily life.
Shaka, put yourself in that Spurs dressing room. What do you say to a teammate like this?
I think it's desperately selfish by Serge Aurier. And as much as footballers aren't necessarily role models, at the same time, you have to understand that in the close environments that our sport is played, and the fact that different Premier League clubs, maybe not Spurs, players have tested positive, you have to recognize that unless you're willing to continue to test yourself every day for the next 2 weeks, any kind of outside interaction such as this, even with your barber, who you are telling us is also testing negative, can potentially push any opening of the season back a couple of weeks' time. And at a point where a lot of people are saying that players should not be paid while the leagues are dormant as they are, and players are claiming different. This kind of act, as selfish as it may be, I think has a wider knock-on effect, not just for Spurs, but for the league in general.
Do you know, Sebi, the stupidity of this is, and it is only and it does seem like something stupid, but, here we have the Premier League desperate to try and finish the season, right? For all the reasons we've spoken about over the last couple of months, trying not to relegate teams without playing games, teams getting promoted, the lawsuits that may follow, all the things that go with it. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars here in revenue to go to clubs. And here we could have, and maybe I'm being a bit over the top here, but if one player or two players are stepping out of line, and that makes the virus spread rapidly amongst teammates, the season will just be cancelled. The season will be cancelled. So one wrong move, one bit of stupidity from some of these players could see the Premier League's plans in the next couple of weeks just crumble, because we know how fast this thing spreads. So players really need to adhere if they want to finish this season, and I'm sure everybody does. They've got to make sure they're adhering to what the doctors and what the guidelines are, so that the Premier League can try and finish the season and put it to bed.
Jules, we won't know the punishment for Aurier just yet, but let's transition this discussion to what would happen if this were in the Bundesliga. What would the punishment be in the Bundesliga for a player, and how close do you think that that'll be to what actually happens to Premier League players should they break these curfews once we get back to action?
So I think if there was a protocol in place and the Premier League had resumed, like it is in the Bundesliga in Germany, then Serge Aurier will have to self-isolate for a week or two, depending on the cases. So in this case, I would think maybe 2 weeks of self-isolation because of what we've been saying. There's someone who comes into your house who hasn't been tested. You don't know, he might be asymptomatic and still has the virus. There's a lot of things. So because you've broken the rules, a bit like Heiko Herrlich, the Augsburg manager, when he went to buy his toothpaste, that was clearly breaking the lockdown rules and the self-isolation that he was on the week before the first game of the Bundesliga for his team. So he had to step out and go in self-isolation and had to be tested again. It will be the same for Aurier. He will be tested as well, again, a bit like with Callum Hudson-Odoi did. And then we will see the result. I think there will be a fine from Spurs, who have put the case under investigation right now. I believe he hadn't been fined for the first two incidents, if you want. Maybe this one is a bit different. We saw Kyle Walker being fined. We saw Jack Grealish being fined. So there's no reason why Serge Aurier will not be fined, I think, by Spurs. But it's again, I know what the boys have been saying about role model, etc. But again, it's a football player. Again, it's another footballer, like all the names that we mentioned before in the last 2 months, who've all broken the rules of lockdown. And in other sports, it doesn't happen.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.